Proudly broadcasting from the Richard Philip Cavallaro Studio.
WRHU.
Hempstead.
You discovered.
A National Association of Broadcasters, multiple Marconi Award-winning station.
WRHU.
Radio Hofstra University.
Hofstra's Morning Wake-Up Call. Morning Wake-Up Call. Lively talk. Long Island life. National news. International issues. Through the minds and mouths of Hofstra students.
You're listening to the Hofstra Morning Wake-Up Call only on 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University.
All thoughts and opinions stated here on the Hofstra Morning Wake-Up Call do not reflect the views of 88.7 FM WRHU and its management, Hofstra University, as well as its Board of Trustees.
All contrasting views can be sent to programming at WRHU.org or to 111 Hofstra University, Hempstead, New York, 11549.
Good morning, WRHU. You're listening to 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University, and this is the Friday edition of the Morning Wake-Up Call, where we're talking Long Island life, national news, and international issues. I'm your host, Alex Hoy, joined by Ashley Blum, Gabby Yanovitz, and Brenda Fernandez. In our first hour, a summary of a White House press briefing on certain key issues. Congressional hearings have taken place about the assassination attempts on former President Trump, and this week's issues you should care about. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Rise and shine. I'm doing well. I'm excited for today. The walk over here, I was very much looking forward to the show today.
I know. I feel like the sun was just coming up, just rising. Me and Alex were talking this morning. Not the best sleep last night. I've been up since 4:30. I think Alex said he's been up since 4.
Maybe we're all connected because I didn't sleep well last night either. Maybe we have like a permanent bond now after doing the show.
It's been a long week. I'm extremely tired.
Aw. Yeah. But it's all right. I'm excited. It always gives me a boost of energy.
That's what I was just going to say. Like, the show gives me energy, and also
who needs
sometimes
coffee when you have morning wake up.
For real. We need a t-shirt that says that, actually.
Right.
But, like, honestly, we could work on that. But, like, I feel like when sometimes I don't get enough sleep, I end up being more energized than if I got too much.
Yeah, you
do you guys feel that? Yeah, like I'll just crash later. But right now, I'm so enthused.
Your body just knows when it's time to like go at it and ready to go.
Absolutely, it's showtime. That means that we're all excited.
Yes. Speaking of showtime, you know the weather's always a show to watch out for.
Oh God.
But
that's true.
Come on.
No, it's true. You're right. That's why I said, oh, God, because the weather's been insane.
Exactly. And so kind of reeling in all the chaos, Gabby, I believe you have our weather update for us today.
Yes, I do. For today's weather forecast, it's currently 67 degrees outside of our WRHU studios here at Hofstra, and up in the sky, it is going to be cloudy with an expected high of 75 degrees during the day and a low of 65 in the evening.
Well, there we have it.
I don't like this weather. I'm gonna the temperatures I like, but it's very humid and like stuffy outside.
Yesterday was so humid. My hair was just like
the hallways in my dorm, because I keep the air on it. Like, I'm crazy. I'm like a polar bear. I keep the air on in my dorm to like a very strong extent. So when I walked out into the hallway of my dorm like yesterday and this morning, I was like, oh my God, this is so gross, just because like they don't keep the air on as much.
I was wearing all right, guys, I wore this shirt 2 days in a row just to get up this morning.
That's the vibe. That's the college student vibe.
I wore this light yesterday because I thought it was cloudy. I didn't think it was that hot out. And I had to change into a tank top because I was so hot.
It's a little toasty. Gross. It's not even the temperature. It's just the humidity.
Yeah.
And I can't stand it. Like, I lived in Arizona for a few years. There's no humidity there. So I'm not, partial to that. I don't like that.
Humidity is horrible. Hate it. It just makes the whole day worse.
Some people like it. Some people do. I'm not one of those people.
I understand why. To be honest. But so, you know what? We'll just move on from humidity. The people that enjoy it, I wish you luck.
Cheers to you.
Now, let's talk some international and national headlines. Brenda, do you want to kick us off?
Yep. So, Governor Kathy Hochul's office responded to reports of potential federal charges against Mayor Eric Adams, saying she is aware of the situation but won't comment until law enforcement confirms the details. Although she has the power to remove him from the office, her spokesperson, Abby Small, stated that Governor Kathy Hochul is monitoring the situation but not taking any immediate action. Meanwhile, Adams has denied any wrongdoings and refuses to step down. However, several political figures, including Comptroller Brad Lander and former Comptroller Scott Stringer, have called for his resignation. They argue that defending himself against federal charges will prevent Adams from effectively leading the city. Brad Lander stated that trust in public institutions is essential for the city's success and that Adams should step aside to allow focused leadership.
Hoda Kotb, co-host of NBC's Today Show, announced on Thursday that she will be leaving her position early next year. Kotb, who has co-hosted the show with Savannah Guthrie since 2017, said that turning 60 felt like the right time to step away. She expressed her desire to spend more time with her 2 young daughters, whom she adopted later in life. Kotb has been a key figure on Today, hosting both the first 2 hours and the 10 a.m. Hoda and Jenna segment. She called this decision the hardest of her life. Guthrie said that the team would miss her deeply but admire her courage in leaving while at the top of her career. NBC has not yet announced her replacement. Kotb said she plans to remain connected to NBC, calling the network her family.
Hurricane John rapidly weakened after hitting Mexico's southern Pacific coast, but left behind severe damage, including deadly mudslides and flooding that may last for days. The storm hit as a Category 3 hurricane late Monday near Punta Maldonado, with winds up to 120 miles per hour. But by Tuesday, it had weakened to a tropical depression with winds of only 35 miles per hour. Although tropical storm warnings were lifted as the storm weakened, it caused significant destruction, blowing roofs off of houses and knocking down trees. In a remote mountain range, 2 people were killed by a mudslide and a 3rd person died due to a landslide. Many areas lost power, leaving around 60,000 people without electricity. Roads were also blocked by fallen trees, and people began searching for food by Tuesday morning. Forecasters warn of possible flash floods in the days ahead, with up to 20 inches of rain expected in some areas. Meteorologists say that warmer ocean temperatures may have contributed to the storm's rapid intensification.
In a different storm, Thursday night marked the landfall of Hurricane Helene in northwest Florida. Helen is a Category 4 storm, and officials have warned that storm surges are possible up to 20 feet. As the storm continues its destructive path across areas in the southeast, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has said that there's a report of at least 1 person dying due to a sign falling on their car while driving on Interstate 4. DeSantis warns that more casualties may be possible as the storm continues, and that 3,500 National Guardsmen are ready to respond and help as needed. And there we go, our national and international headlines. 2 different storms making landfall on similar time periods.
Yeah, as we said, the weather, I guess it's not just here. Obviously, it's way more severe, in other places.
Yeah.
And we're here talking about the
We're
humidity,
not quite
but it's
in the south where
it's
it's
absolutely
really heating
dangerous.
up. Yeah.
And it's a very scary thing. Like you think of weather and you're just like, oh, the rain. I don't like the rain. But there are some really severe storms that are taking place.
No, it could honestly end up being a public health crisis when a
Yeah.
storm like this comes in. And,
Yeah.
because of climate change, these could happen more frequently. These could happen more severely. It's a serious problem, and thankfully we have the tools to combat and respond. But when there's 2 at once, that's double the amount of attention that needs to go.
And in
towards
different
these areas.
countries too.
Yeah.
So and Hurricane Helen is expected to hit multiple states, which we have a little bit on it in our next story as well. But
It's kind of been already starting.
yeah, it's already made
way
landfall
north already. But yeah, crazy storms. But speaking of some of those topics about Hurricane Helen were covered in a White House press briefing that happened yesterday, I believe. Ashley, I believe you have some more updates for us on that story as well.
Yes, we do. So the White House held an essential press briefing yesterday, which covered, as Alex said, many of the key issues that are circulating throughout the U.S. federal government. Starting off, the most pertinent announcement previewed at a meeting was previewed yesterday, and what was previewed is a meeting between President Joe Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that took place only a few hours after the press briefing. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre gave insight into the Biden-Harris administration's stance on the Russia-Ukraine war.
It's been almost 3 years. Almost 3 years. And this president has been there day one. He has been able to bring more than 50 nations together to support Ukraine and their fight for their democracy. And so that's what you can expect. And the president is very proud of the impact of that support, what it's had, and is proud of that coalition.
The meeting between the two leaders focused on new U.S. aid packages being provided for Ukraine and the possibility of Ukraine launching long-range missiles into Russia. Here's what President Joe Biden had to say during his broadcasted discussion with Zelensky.
I see two key pieces. First, right now we have to strengthen Ukraine's position on the battlefield. And that's why today I'm proud to announce a new $2.4 billion package of security assistance. I've also directed the Pentagon to allocate all the remaining security assistance funding that has been appropriated to Ukraine, period, by the end of my term, which is January 20. And this will strengthen Ukraine's position in future negotiations. Let me be clear. Russia will not prevail in war. Russia will not prevail. Ukraine will prevail, and we'll continue to stand by you every step of the way.
Another major point of discussion at yesterday's press briefing was Hurricane Helene, as we mentioned before, which is now a Category 4 hurricane making landfall in Florida. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell spoke at the conference yesterday about the extremely serious nature of the hurricane.
We have been preparing for this storm for a number of days, and we began moving resources into Florida on Monday. I just want everybody to know that this is going to be a multi-state event with the potential for significant impacts from Florida all the way to Tennessee. And the president wants to make sure that everyone is paying attention to the potential life-threatening impacts that this storm may bring. And he has directed me to travel there tomorrow to assess the impacts.
She also gave some insight into what should be expected in the coming hours and days as the storm progresses. She warned citizens to pay close attention to local officials' orders.
The entire state of Florida is under some type of warning right now, whether that's a hurricane warning or a tropical storm warning. And we expect life-threatening flash flooding in the state's north as the storm continues to move north. And so I need everybody to pay attention to their local officials. They're going to have the best information on the specific risks where you are at.
Karine Jean-Pierre also explained that President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are announcing new plans to help lessen gun violence in the U.S.
From the American Rescue Plan to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act to issuing more executive actions to reduce gun violence than any other administration, the president and the vice president have continued to use every tool available to protect people from the epidemic of gun violence.
Biden plans to combat the issue by signing an executive order to accelerate progress regarding two key priorities: combating emerging firearm threats and improving school-based active shooter drills. Pierre explained that the work doesn't stop there.
Additionally, federal departments and agencies will be announcing a range of additional actions to reduce gun violence, from promoting safe gun storage and red flag laws to improving the background check system. The Biden-Harris administration will continue to do everything it can to put an end to this senseless violence while calling on Congress to fulfill their duty and pass common sense gun safety legislation.
So clearly a very influential press briefing that they had yesterday, speaking on the issues in Russia and Ukraine with Volodymyr Zelensky, also the issue of gun violence and the hurricane that, as we mentioned in headlines, is making landfall. So a lot to discuss here.
Absolutely. The one thing that I take away from this is that, Biden has only a few months left, and I think he knows he's not running for re-election. So honestly, I think something to really combat these issues and through the sounds that I heard, he seems like, very concrete about his plans. So honestly, I think it's a good thing that, he's able to take these last few months and say, this is what I want to do. These are the policies I want to implicate before my time is up.
Yeah, absolutely.
When he was announcing that he was stepping down from his campaign and not running for re-election, he had this moment in his speech where he was saying, like, oh, I have like a list of things that I want to help the nation with before my term is over. And, I spoke with a few experts, I spoke with a few professors of political science, and some of them were like, I don't think he'll have time to like get all of these through. But with the sounds that we just heard, I think if he thinks these through and is smart about it with him and his administration, like, probably won't be able to get through all of them because his list was long. It covered a lot of different topics.
Yeah, these are three main issues, but there are a lot. There are a lot of other ones.
The important ones that we just talked about and that what we just heard about from his sounds, I think he'll be able to help combat some of the issues that we're facing with them, especially with the Russia-Ukraine war and the gun control and gun violence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that all three of these things are very important. We should kind of take it one thing at a time. Him speaking to Zelensky is a really big step, as you heard from Biden himself. He's sending a lot of money.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It still just shocks me how, this war is still going on and so much aid has been sent and, it's very sad. But Biden seems to take a firm stance in, providing support to Ukraine.
Which I think is great. And I think, sorry, Alex, I just want to say, like, from my research on this, the major new development, because we have, as Gabby said, we have been sending aid, and it's great that we're sending more aid. The major new development is the long range missiles, and the talks of that being, launched into Russia, because there are restrictions on those things at the moment. And Zelensky and Biden are in meetings and in talks about changing those restrictions, and the possibility of actually implementing that. And that could, I'm not exactly sure how it'll play out, obviously, but that could very well change the course of the war.
Yeah, and President Zelensky, during the United Nations address a few days ago, he made an appearance there and was talking with the UN about potentially getting permission to use these long-range weapons. So not only is he talking to President Biden to try and convince him to, like, lend him some of them, he's also talking with world and global powers to even, like, morally and ethically, like, not morally and ethically, lawfully be permissible to launch these. Morally and ethically is an entirely different thing.
Right, which is something we could absolutely talk about, but it's definitely something that if approved and if it does come to fruition could change the course of things. Yeah. For sure. And regarding the gun violence piece, I want to talk about each of these pieces because I think it's important. I think that it's great that there's more legislature coming out and more things being signed. We've reported on gun violence a lot on this show, just this semester alone.
We've also just discussed it, and I think all of us collectively are just really disgusted by, as she said,
everybody is
epidemic.
And that's honestly sad that it's put that way, but it is accurate, unfortunately. And so I think it's great that things are being signed. However, I do feel that this is the type of issue that is a marathon. I feel that it's something that's going to take a lot of time.
It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be, but I feel like major reform happens over long periods of time with this issue. So I think it's great that they're trying to do it. But Gabby, it goes back to what you said, and Alex as well, like he only has a few months left. So what major reform will be made in that time? We can hope for as much as possible, but we're not quite sure,
And that's the other thing too, like, we also have to see more of his plans and more of the details that he's releasing about his, about what he plans to do with the months that he has left. I think he needs to have a few more details come out about them, so that everything can kind of work together and make sure that whatever happens is a thought out and, like, beneficial plan for people.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's still across the aisle will always take time and take discussion and more legislation and people, debating issues. But I think these executive orders about, improving the active shooter drills will, hopefully across the board in like public schools make a difference.
Yeah, and that's a big one. Like, how is he planning to change them and like improve them for when threats do happen, or even like just risks of threats, because sometimes you get risks that come in that don't always play out. Sometimes they're just false. But that's still the possibility
it's
of
still
like,
something you have
how
to take
do you
seriously.
respond? How do you respond to these threats and then get everything like checked out and like basically greenlit so that things can return to a quote unquote normal in the school day? How are we going to combat those issues? And then also, once we do identify an actual threat that is at a school that maybe we didn't hear about before, how are we going to respond to those?
Right. And then I do just want to mention, obviously we spoke about it in headlines, but Hurricane Helene that is making landfall. You heard from one of the FEMA administrators how much they're preparing. And I think that that's great. It is a scary thing, as we mentioned, but I know that President Biden is putting a lot of aid and a lot of preparation ahead of time into this. So again, like I'm glad that he's trying to be proactive with this, because look, we know it's coming and we know that it's going to probably hit hard, according to meteorologists. So I'm glad that there's a lot of aid being put in, but I hope that everybody stays safe,
Yes,
Absolutely.
Hopefully.
Should we take a look to the other side of the election, as in former President Donald Trump and what's been going on with him? The first congressional hearings took place yesterday for the 2 Trump assassination attempts that happened in the last few months. The House Task Force, which is comprised of 7 Republicans and 6 Democrats, made clear in their arguments that the Secret Service was in fact responsible for the security mishaps that led to a gunman attempting to shoot Trump at his July 13th rally. The primary issues lawmakers voiced at the hearing included the lack of communication for the Secret Service to local authorities to properly secure the building that the gunman Thomas Michael Crooks was able to access during the rally to open fire on the former president. Prior to the rally, the building was, quote, widely agreed upon to be a security threat, according to AP News. However, Edward Lenz, commander for the Butler County Emergency Services Unit, said in his testimony that his unit did not receive any feedback or guidance from the Secret Service regarding securing the top of the building Crooks shot from. The task force is additionally investigating the more recent assassination attempt that took place on September 15th. However, the hearing Thursday was focused on the July attempt, where the task force has spent the last 2 months gathering information from almost 24 interviews with law enforcement and nearly 3,000 pages of documents from the Secret Service. Amid the congressional hearing, former First Lady Melania Trump sat down with Fox News for her first interview yesterday in more than 2 years. In the interview, she called her husband's survival after 2 assassination attempts miracles and asked for Democrats and individuals in the media to put an end to branding her husband as a threat to democracy. A lot of interesting things to come of this.
Can I just start out by saying I do agree with the quote that you mentioned at the end. How someone survives to, 1, a direct shot, grazed his ear. If his head wasn't turned maybe a half of an inch, he would have been gone, is crazy to me. And I know that, that was a little bit ago now and it's in the past, but, this second attempt, which is still being investigated, definitely brought all of this back up again, rightfully so. And even like, as we mentioned last week, I reported at the Trump rally, it was on everybody's minds. And it's just crazy to me that it's happened twice.
Twice now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's definitely lucky to have been not as injured as we thought he would have been. And joining us now to kind of speak on these a little bit more as well is our very own Cameron Bowden. Cameron.
Yeah, when it comes to the Trump assassination attempts, it's so outrageous that they happened with such close proximity to each other. I mean, you have one that happens literally less than 2 months from the other one, and that is, in some ways, you could consider that a miracle. I mean, the second one was far less actionable, if that makes sense, than the
I
first.
agree.
Obviously, the second one, there were no shots fired except for the Secret Service agent firing upon the alleged shooter, Ryan Wesley Ruth, excuse me. So it's very, very interesting that it happened so close to each other, and it's even more interesting how the discussions that have come out following this has been more about security for all political candidates as opposed to just one, because there are very real threats. And this actually draws another point on former President Trump. He was recently briefed by U.S. intelligence agents that Iran is plotting, or has been looking at potentially plotting an assassination attempt against him. So it shows that he is really kind of a target by a lot of foreign but also domestic threats. So it is really interesting to see how this conversation has really happened surrounding all political candidates, despite only one right now really being hit the hardest.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also yesterday, we're having a presidential symposium that's happening at our university right now. And one of the conferences or discussions that I attended yesterday was about the sociology behind, political violence and what draws people from the opposite parties to really have disrespect for each other, not trust each other, and eventually be willing to be violent towards one another in politics. And it just comes down, what the speaker was saying, it came down to almost just a change in our social values and how we as a society have just seen, our political leaders, when they do something that and are unapologetic about it, or maybe incite violence, or even, just do something that is out of the social norm. I think people are so influenced by who's at the top that when they see, someone who's at the top who isn't following the social norm, they either say, this isn't right, and since they're not doing it, this gives me an excuse. I think it's obviously an assassination attempt is, the very polarizing
very end of the spectrum.
Yeah, very
but
extreme.
I think it still comes down to, just this is that a word?
Sociological
issue that's now just being interweaved into our politics, and it's becoming something that people are so passionate about that it drives them to violence.
Yeah, and I also agree, but the thing that I actually found surprising is actually the fact that Donald Trump is still running for presidency after almost being shot like 3 times, basically.
Yeah,
well, you have that iconic image of him putting the fist up, yelling fight.
Yeah,
so
I think that honestly, like based on what we know about him and his characteristics, however you feel about him, he is not one to back down, and I think that this only fueled the motivation, because here's the thing: is that if you have people trying to assassinate you, you could look at this from a few different angles. If Iran is allegedly planning an assassination attempt on him, what does that say about what he would do in presidency? Like it's only solidifying his plans of like shutting down everything that's going on with Iran and not giving funding anymore and things of that nature. So it's almost kind of supporting, no matter if you agree with his plans or not, it is supporting that if that entity is looking to possibly allegedly assassinate him, it is supporting that people do believe that he will follow through on what he is promising, if that makes sense. Does that make sense how I'm wording that? It's
absolutely.
So I think that it's only fueling him because it's showing like, see, like these people are not, they don't want me to get in office, and that just fuels his fire.
Challenges.
Yeah, and it definitely creates a narrative, because politics sadly is all about narratives. And it's a chess game, as we always say.
One of the presidential symposium presentations was politics as theater. So you have a very clear kind of combination of acting, of performing, and of politics.
Yeah, all of these things that have been happening to former President Trump are only empowering his campaign and lifting him up. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have some recent pollings that have shown kind of shifts in patterns when it relates to viewing gender as an obstacle or barrier in the upcoming presidential election. Some of the patterns that have been recorded and observed are primarily among Democratic men who 8 years ago during Hillary Clinton's campaign, 3 out of 10 would say that her gender hurt her campaign either somewhat or a lot, and now during Vice President Harris's campaign, that number raised to about half of Democratic men who would say that her gender will hurt her campaign more. These numbers come from the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, and the same poll shows that Americans are more likely to say Donald Trump's gender is more likely to help his campaign and help him win the election. These patterns are also similar in Democratic women, where 8 years ago, 4 out of 10 would say that Clinton's gender would harm her, and now, again, that number is raised to about half that would say Harris's gender will harm her campaign as well. Even though that there's the potential that Harris wins and that we have our first female president, this would rally some more energy among her supporters. Harris has chosen not to focus more on her gender as a prospect and as much as Hillary Clinton did in her campaign. Instead, Harris has chosen to focus more on reproductive rights and is focused on playing on the fact that Trump has nominated 3 of the Supreme Court justices that helped to overturn Roe v. Wade. One of the other things, too, is that when this poll has come out, getting all of these responses back, some of the men that were polled were responding to that Trump's gender makes him, quote, a guy's guy, a man's man kind of guy, and said that because Harris hasn't really released money details about her policies, hasn't really shown what she can offer everyone as a whole in their eyes, is that she's less likely to change attitudes in their eyes when it comes to the election and when it comes to viewing gender as an obstacle for them.
I think you're definitely on the right track. You're right that Harris hasn't used gender as a main strategy, and I can appreciate that because y'all know I'm very empowering. I host the women's show here at WRHU, and
she does.
Yeah, girl power. It's very cheesy, but I believe that women have equal opportunities to men, and that really it's going to be you as a person and your policies, that people should fall in love with, and if you're looking for votes, that should be the reason why, not just for gender.
I will agree that I think Clinton definitely sold the I'm with her a lot more than
she played off of it a lot more.
I think she did, and I don't know that necessarily hurt her campaign. I mean, according to the data, it might have, but I just think it's interesting that so many countries around the world that you would say are like less progressive maybe than the United States have seen female leaders, and several of them. So I just think it's still insane. It's just surprising to me that it's still taken this long for the United States to even really have a real player in the election, and also why it's still an issue of contempt. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the biggest things for me was that, so one of the projects I was really working on over the summer was social media as a role in this election, right? And one of the biggest things was Kamala Harris really embracing the memes on the internet, right? The Brat Summer, the Chapel Roan, Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess. But on the other end of the spectrum, and I spoke with Michael Lowinger, the host of the WNYC show on the media. And he said, on the other hand, Trump is really embracing more manly men, right? He's embracing more social media creators like the Paul brothers, like the Nelk boys, like Aiden Ross, who are all very guy, very masculine, very, very energy driven around being manly, right? So you can really see this maybe playing a role on some of the voters in this country seeing Trump as more of a guy's guy because he's embracing those people, because he's going to those more masculine men to try and really boost his campaign, really get his name out there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What I will say, though, just to play a little bit of devil's advocate about these polls, is I'm currently in a social psychology class, and I find it fascinating about it's all about how people interact with one another and how people think of one another, and we've really related it back to the political scene a lot, and we talk about attribution, right? Like what you contribute to certain things, the reasonings and things, and I feel that on a subconscious level as humans, we tend to, and I've learned about this as well, there's many theories on it, we can't help but associate multiple things together. As humans, it's very hard to just pinpoint one thing about a person and judge them solely based off of that when you know other things about a person.
Yeah.
So these polls are definitely something to look at, that it's changed. But even if people who were voting in these polls and answering these questions weren't thinking it consciously, they already have preconceived notions and biases about both of these candidates that may have influenced the way that they, put in their answers to these polls. And they're saying now that Harris's gender may hurt her a bit more. But it is possible that some people may be thinking about other things that may hurt her subconsciously, although the poll was about gender. Do you see what I mean? Just a thought, a little devil's advocate thought.
Yeah. You can't really separate the
gender
I think
of the
it
people
is from their policies.
Yeah, I think it is telling.
There's no way to do it.
Yeah, I think it's telling, but it's so hard to separate one thing about a person. Like Alex, I can't just think of like your job at RHU, because I think of Alex like you're my friend. Alex is my friend. We work together outside of RHU at the Pride Guide office, like et cetera, et cetera. When I see you, I think of multiple things. So I feel that even though obviously they're not besties with these political candidates, it kind of plays in there as well.
That's where it gets to the more minuscule stuff. Oh, she's she's a woman, but she's also black and Indian, and also used to be a prosecutor and used to be a senator.
Yeah,
and was a part of the Biden administration. So all of these pieces have probably like a net positive or net negative effect on how people view her.
Yeah,
and her
absolutely.
favorability.
That is true. Yeah.
But speaking of Harris and her she's really played into her stance on abortion and reproductive rights. This is kind of our topic for this week's Nope.
Issue you should care about?
Thank you, Cameron.
There you go.
There it is, and now it works. And you know what, Cameron? We take it to you for this week's edition.
Thank you, Alex. So abortion and reproductive rights have always been a massive issue in an election year. However, nothing really came to foot on this topic until 2022 with the Dobbs decision, or 2021, with the Dobbs decision, effectively overturning the federal right to an abortion. Since then, we've seen abortion bans across the U.S. and a sort of patchwork of protecting abortions versus complete bans across the country. Since the overturning of the landmark Roe v. Wade, abortions across the country have actually increased, according to PBS. They report that because of protections in blue states, more people are crossing state lines to receive reproductive care. Now, each candidate has been very outspoken on the issue, with the Democrats leaning far more into protecting the right versus Republicans, who generally support bans or support stopping protections. Here's both presidential candidates, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, on the topic earlier this month during the ABC presidential debate.
Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime of violation to their body does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
For 52 years, they've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states. And through the genius and heart and strength of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do that. Now, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. I believe strongly in it. Ronald Reagan did also. 85% of Republicans do. Exceptions. Very important. But we were able to get it, and now states are voting on it.
However, this fight for reproductive justice has expanded to more fertility things. For one, a lot of these abortion bans target providers as opposed to individuals, stopping abortions at their source. Another major fight which has emerged is related to in vitro fertilization, which was temporarily banned in Alabama. Since then, fights to protect IVF have emerged across the states and also at the federal level. With more on reproductive rights, abortion rights, and this election, we go to an interview between myself and Hofstra law grad Janine Oliaga, a family planning lawyer and abortion rights advocate.
Sure. My name is Janine Oliaga. I am a family formation attorney and reproductive rights advocate. I help anyone who is navigating non-traditional family building, whether it is through surrogacy, egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation, adoption. I practice in New York, Maine, and New Hampshire.
So just to start us off, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022, we saw a massive movement to protect abortion rights through legislation. However, we've seen little to no advancement on this agenda item at the federal level. Could you kind of give context as to what kind of role you think that abortion and reproductive rights are going to play in this upcoming election?
I think even from the last debate, it's obvious that reproductive rights is front and center this election. The right, more conservative politicians know that they're losing ground on this important topic. So let's back it up. Let's talk about Dobbs quickly. What Dobbs did was overturn the federal right to abortion and return that issue to the states. Now, different states, as we know, have taken different approaches. Some have enacted bans through personhood legislation, right? We've seen states claim that embryos are people and therefore deserving of all the protections that people are deserving of, right? This not only bans abortion, it puts IVF at risk. So other states have taken the opposite approach, right? We've seen states move forward with protecting abortion in their states. And then we saw a court case in Alabama this past winter come out and say that embryos are extrauterine children. So that created a bunch of problems. All the IVF clinics closed in Alabama initially. Some have reopened. But it highlighted the close relationship between abortion and IVF. You cannot have IVF and all of its medical advances if you also have abortion bans and personhood legislation. The two simply cannot coexist. So once that connection was made, albeit through a horrible case law with a lot of religious language in that court opinion, which keeps me up at night, once that link was made, right, where Republicans were unable to say, we're pro-IVF, but we're anti-abortion, right? It's really put them front and center in the sense of Tammy Duckworth asked for support, the Access to IVF Act at the federal level. That was months ago and again a few weeks ago. And guess what? All but 2 Republicans refused to vote in favor of the Access to IVF Act. So they're not pro-IVF, and their stance on abortion and conception and personhood and life beginning at conception is really what is at issue this coming election. It's not only abortion bans, it's how it bleeds into family building in all different aspects.
We'll talk about Donald Trump first. He's been extremely vague on this abortion stance, right? He's been sometimes painting it as a states' right issue, sometimes it's a religious issue. What type of effects do you think abortion will play specifically on Trump? What kind of role do you think abortion will play on the Trump campaign as he's, advocating for the presidency?
Yes, the concept of a plan. He said, too, that he was going to make all the insurance companies pay for IVF again, but also championing the fact that many times in the media, he's taken credit for changing the Supreme Court in such a way to overturn Roe. So again, you can't have this dichotomy. You can't have this dichotomy where you claim to be pro-IVF and then anti-abortion and pro-personhood legislation. They cannot coexist. And I think until this year, people really didn't understand the link between the two. So the more Trump comes out and speaks in support of abortion bans, which he may take a step back from and say, no, I've just returned it to the states, this is a states issue. The more he comes out against that, I think the more he's going to isolate himself from people who are more conservative but don't necessarily buy into that life begins at conception. It didn't really help when the Pope came out and said what the Pope said, but the Catholic Church and a presidential candidate are 2 different things. I'm curious to see the details of the concept of the plan relating to how he's going to ensure that everyone has access to IVF.
Kamala Harris, on the other hand, she's been very vocal about her support for reproductive rights. However, many have felt disillusioned over her lack of codification during the time when the Biden administration, which she was the vice president of, had a majority in both the House and Senate. What type of effects do you think abortion is going to play specifically on her presidential candidacy throughout this fall?
I think she's going to have to come out, and it's hard when knowing that abortion's been returned to the states, right? It's hard for her until we restore Roe through federal legislation. It's going to be very hard for her to take a stance that people believe in and claim, if she's out there saying, I'm pro-choice, we really need to make movement at the federal level, even though we're going to run into bipartisan issues. She really needs to make some movement at the federal level in order for people to believe what she's saying and how she feels. She did a great job in that debate when it came to the topic of reproductive rights. And I think the follow-through, as long as the follow-through is there, we can see that increasing her points.
Let's talk about ballot measures because abortion rights are on the table in a couple of different states across the US this year, which typically we've seen that with a lot of historical examples like Kansas, for example, which is an overwhelmingly red legislature and has a red governor, if I'm not mistaken. However, there was an overwhelming decision by the citizens in that state to keep abortion legal within the state, despite obviously being Republican. So what does this overwhelming support for abortion rights, even in some of the most red of states, mean for Republicans who have been thus far very supportive of banning abortion and banning reproductive rights?
Every time abortion and reproductive rights has been on the ballot, it has won. So we are going to see state politicians that are anti-abortion, that are anti-choice, right? We're going to see them isolated from the people that they represent, because if we're talking about returning this decision to the states, and every time these issues appear on a state ballot, they win. So the overwhelming majority of American people do support the right to decide. Doesn't mean that they're pro-abortion. It means that they're pro-choice. Every time this issue is pulled, that's how it comes out. So even in red states, in Maine, Senator Collins was one of the only Republican, only two in the country voted in support of Tammy Duckworth's bill. So even Republicans understand that this is an issue important to their constituents. They need to stop speaking out against it very publicly in order for the support of Donald Trump.
Then that plays a similar role with IVF. Do you kind of see any ballot measures that might have a role in impacting IVF and other fertility treatments that could be on the ballot this fall?
I'm hoping to see more legislation at the state level that's protective of IVF, whether it's access to IVF or protecting physicians. The legislation in Alabama is problematic, overwhelming. It was important for the people of Alabama. What it does is protect the physicians who practice IVF. The issue is that it kind of backdoored personhood onto the books, right? They're protected from harming embryos, which are still people under their case law. But the more we see protections for IVF at the state level, right, the more we see language protecting the access to abortion care and reproductive rights care, the harder it's going to be for politicians to stand up and say, well, my constituents are anti-abortion. My constituents are for abortion bans. If we can pass these the two cannot coexist. You cannot have both. Cannot have personhood legislation. You cannot have abortion bans if you also want access to IVF. This differs a little. J.D. Vance's position is a little different in the sense that I'm pretty sure he's open about not really caring about IVF. But there are a number of Republican politicians who are coming out saying that they are pro-IVF. They support everyone's right to access IVF. And it's problematic for them if they're also out there claiming to be pro-abortion ban.
So states like Nevada, Colorado, and Florida already have these coming up on their, November ticket. With trends in states like Kansas, what are your thoughts on the ballot measures in those states coming up, this November? Do you think it's going to be another overwhelming support of it, even in a state like Florida, which has been one of the most, restrictive of some of those culture war issues that we've been seeing? Or do you think that there could be some outturning of support for an actual abortion ban in states like Florida?
I think access to IVF is unique in the sense that there are so many individuals, I'm not saying politicians, but individual voters who, despite their religious affiliation, support IVF. So it is my hope that even in states where there are culture wars, even in Florida, which is determined to ban the books, at least let's hope that their constituents come out and vote in favor of access to IVF. There are a large number of fertility clinics in Florida. There are a large population that grows families through IVF for any reason, right? Whether you're a single individual, whether you are in a same-sex relationship, whether you're facing a diagnosis of infertility or cancer. So it's my hope that even in a state like Florida, even in a state that is in the midst of the right-wing grasp on politics, people will come out and vote to protect IVF.
Is there anything further on the topic of abortion and reproductive rights that you feel is important to discuss?
Reproductive rights is not going away. It is at risk. If we want a future for the children, the next generation, that the right is so pro-children, then we need to make sure that they have access to care that they need for any reason, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, relationship status. This is not just a women's issue or women's health issue. This is an individual bodily autonomy issue.
Thank you so much to Jalene Oliaga for sitting down with me on that interview. Now, the biggest thing that I take away from this is the importance of down ballot and ballot measure voting, right? Because in states like Nevada and Colorado and Florida, most notably, which have abortion protection / abortion bans on their ballots this election season, that's going to make the biggest difference. And one of the biggest things that I took away from this is that every single time reproductive rights and abortion rights has come up on the ballot, they have been in favor of keeping it enshrined in their states, right? Even in Kansas, one of the very red states, red legislature, red governor, they still managed to the voters still managed to keep abortion protected within their state. So it's really, really interesting to see how even in states where it's demonstrably right-leaning, which, when you consider right-leaning or conservatism, you think abortion bans, you think, not protecting those reproductive rights. So it's really, really interesting in that way. I think the other thing that I mentioned is that down-ballot voting is far more important than, of course, every voting is important. Voting for your president, voting for your representatives, voting for your senators is one of the most important things you can do. But it's also important seeing how your local officials do it, how your state legislature's officials, your state senators, your governor. These are all important races that can have really, really, really important effects on certain issues within your state. So when I hear people say, oh, I'm not voting this year, there's no point in me voting, blah, 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 especially here in New York, it matters a lot. Yeah. It matters a lot because your state legislature people are going to do far more to you specifically
affect you
than
way
the federal
more.
government. Respectfully, we've seen the federal government for the past 4 years. It's been in gridlock. There's been very little passed.
Right.
But you know what has happened? State legislatures.
Right. Yeah. I've said in the past that sometimes it's obviously whoever is in the role of president of the United States is very important, but does much in our life really change when the president transfers over? I don't know. I think I agree with you in that it really comes down to the local legislation.
Small races.
Yeah, I think it's both. Obviously, not everything will change in a new presidency, but things could change. Foreign affairs, economy, things.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm not
We're not saying that it's inconsequential.
But I think it's someone who's been in New York my whole life, there's definitely a lot more effects from these smaller races, and a lot of people who we've interviewed and spoke to, especially on days like Super Tuesday and things where there's other races going on, it's people don't know about these local legislators, and I think it's really important to do your research and know more about it. And on the issue of Roe v. Wade, it's a hard issue because people voting on it is going to be really interesting to see at a state level. It's hard because it's been a major topic of the presidential election, and I think that it is definitely important. It's just important to note also that the president doesn't have direct control over it. It has to go through obviously the vote, and then it comes into the justices that were appointed, and that's really where people are paying attention to the presidential race, Yeah, so I also wanted to mention too, Cameron, you mentioned in your report before this interview that IVF is also
that's a massive thing that Janine mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting that it's being grouped in with abortion. Reproductive rights, I totally understand. I'm an IVF child. My mom had me when she was 42 years old, tried for years to have a child, and couldn't. And so obviously I am a big supporter for IVF because I am here. And the kind of, I don't want to use the word extremist, but it is kind of a bit of an extreme argument for why IVF shouldn't be a thing, is because you fertilize multiple embryos and implant those within the mother to hope that one will eventually grow, because your chances are not 100%. So people think that, since you're fertilizing multiple embryos and then they don't always have the chance to survive, that you're murdering or not, not allowing that to survive.
The way that Janine explained it was that it backdoored personhood into an embryo, right? Into a uterine embryo, which is might be a little bit confusing, still confusing to me, but they essentially stated that any embryo, no matter what, is like a child. And that's a very dangerous path we can go down, because immediately following Alabama passing this, or the state Supreme Court ruling on this, all of their IVF fertilization clinics closed.
Which is
some
horrible.
And some are opened up now, but
Yeah.
it really, it's not necessarily that it criminalizes the people, though there are state abortion bans that do that. Like Texas, it targets the, person who receives the abortion, and there's like a bounty system for that. But in some states, it targets the provider directly with jail time, with with huge fines that are just detrimental that you'd never be able to recover from.
And coming from someone who wants to go into medicine, I'm not sure what kind of medicine, although fertility medicine and reproductive, like women's health has definitely been something that's come up in my mind. I want to go to medical school. It puts a lot of pressure on the providers because of, depending on the situation, it could be the difference between life and death of the mother.
Yeah.
An abortion is a medical procedure that is used for other things other than just someone not wanting to carry a pregnancy. So it's a slippery slope. And with the IVF thing, as you said, they're not targeting the person in particular, but I think that it's hard because I know that I was implanted with 2 other embryos that did, I don't have any siblings on my mom's side, so I know that they did not make it. But, does that make it illegal? Does that make it something that shouldn't be done? No. So it's a slippery slope.
I mean, one thing with when it comes to IVF is that it was being debated at a federal level, to protect it completely.
Yeah.
And only 2 Republican senators voted in favor of it. Senator Tammy Duckworth's bill, which would protect IVF at a federal level, only 2 Republicans voted in favor of it, which is really, it's really interesting how it's become such a politicized issue all of a sudden.
Yeah, I don't know why you would ever want to limit someone
previously
having a child.
IVF, I don't think was ever mentioned in the media when it came to politics,
No,
right? And because of
Not
one
really.
Alabama
It's
state,
a medical procedure.
exactly, because of one Alabama, and that's what a lot of people argue that abortion is too. It's just a medical procedure. So it is really interesting to see how quickly it's become a politicized issue, especially when it really shouldn't be. Yeah. It's just another way for a mother to try and
bringing religion into politics, time after time.
Church and state stuff.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you guys. I'm not really sure about IVF, but do they provide funding? Because I could imagine that's really expensive.
They provide Planned Parenthood funding, which is one thing.
So IVF is extremely expensive, and that's the reason why a lot of parents don't end up doing that. Former President Trump has come out saying that he is planning on policies that will require insurance companies to cover it, which is easier said than done, but it would be a very big step. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. That's something that Janine mentioned about how he has the concept of a plan, right? And that makes sense, right? This is a very unpopular issue on behalf of the Republican Party, so it's going to make sense that he's not going to want to address it that much, or he's going to want to avoid it. But the thing he's stayed true to is, I'm very happy with the Supreme Court justices that I put in place. I'm very happy with that.
Yeah.
Which it's scary because it's sure, whatever your politics are, supermajority in the Supreme Court is a very scary thing. But we're kind of we're kind of seeing a very big movement towards conservatism within the country, especially at a lawmaking level, right? At a judicial level, with 6 Supreme Court justices. I mean, for example, one thing that I really care about that's really important to me is trans healthcare and being allowing to be transgender within the country without having any kind of restrictions placed on it. I'm a transgender woman myself, and when I see the kind of fights between abortion and reproductive justice and LGBTQ rights so interlinked because it's bodily autonomy, I'm really nervous because the Supreme Court is taking on these kind of cases in the coming months. They're taking on a Tennessee minor gender affirming care ban, which is a very scary thing because if that is, if they say that's constitutional, that opens the door to everything.
When it comes to the Supreme Court, when it's in the highest law of the land, you know what I mean? That, although it could go, turn up and be up to the states at some point, it still is setting a precedent.
Exactly. So I'd be
Yeah.
interested to see if the Supreme Court takes an IVF case, for example, because then
That would be
which it doesn't even make
big
sense
deal.
because like one of the biggest things is that even like right-leaning more conservative people believe in IVF. Like they might not believe
almost
in abortion,
everybody
but
does,
IVF
except for
is
very
widely
extremist
supported. So why
individuals.
in the world? And that's another thing. Republicans, a lot of like Republicans who are running for, positions are always like, no, we support IVF. We support IVF. Like we're chill. But then when they're in the Senate, they won't vote in favor of it. When they're in the House of Representatives, they won't vote in favor of it.
Yeah.
So it's a very weird thing.
Yeah.
It's a very odd thing.
I think the concept, like you said it perfectly, the concept of bodily autonomy, right? Like what someone is, like, they're making choices for their own body. And I think, like, when Roe v. Wade was initially overturned, obviously people had very, very specific views about abortion, whether you're pro-life, pro-choice. But I think that most women, everyone that I spoke to, I know, was just worried. They took it a bit more big picture and were just worried about the fact that there was laws in legislature that could control what a woman does with her body and what could come from that and what other rights could it go into, like you said, like LGBTQ rights and other things of that nature. Like what could come of that if you set a precedent for any kind of law that controls that.
The last closing note I want to say is that Janine said you don't have to support using abortion, but you can support the choice for a woman to do what she wants to do.
I think that's a great way to say it. That's a great quote. Yeah.
What a great discussion. What a great way to end off our hour one. But stay tuned. We have hour two coming at you soon. But for now,
You discovered
A cornerstone of the Lawrence Herbert School of Communication.
WRHU.
Hofstra's Morning Wake-Up Call. Morning Wake-Up Call. Lively talk. Long Island Life. National news. International issues. Through the minds and mouths of Hofstra students.
You're listening to the Hofstra Morning Wake Up Call only on 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University.
All thoughts and opinions stated here on the Hofstra Morning Wake Up Call do not reflect the views of 88.7 FM WRHU and its management, Hofstra University, as well as its Board of Trustees.
All contrasting views can be sent to programming at WRHU.org or to 111 Hofstra University, Hempstead, New York, 11549.
thank you for joining us here on 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University. We're in hour two of today's morning wake-up call, where we're talking Long Island life, national news, and international issues. I'm your host, Alex Hoy, joined by Ashley Blum, Cameron Bowden, Gabby Yanovitz, and Brenda Fernandez. In our second hour, Pope Francis takes some rare steps. The 2024 Climate Week is coming up, and Long Island has a plan to resist climate change, and an interview about the future on stage with a local high school senior. Here we are in hour two, even more energized.
Very exciting.
Don't know how it's possible, but
So
hour
energized.
two is always
So energized.
up and ready to go.
We covered a lot of stuff in
There
hour
was
one, a lot of really
a
key
lot.
issues. And I think that that's exciting for us as journalists to be covering a variety of things, especially with the election coming up so fast. Crazy.
Oh my gosh, it's less than 6 weeks.
Less
if I'm
than
not mistaken?
6.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
like-
already printed out my mail-in ballot. Oh no, I have to print it out.
I actually should
I
check
have
my
mine
mailbox
printed.
here
She's
to
ready.
get my mail-in ballot.
Yeah,
I
I
have
was
mine printed and ready.
I was
to
walking
go.
by the library, and what's the organization? Hofstra has like a voting organization.
Hofstra Votes.
Hofstra Votes. Oh, that's a
It's
fitting
just
name.
Hofstra
So I was
Votes.
walking. Yeah, I was walking by the library yesterday, and they were like, "Are you registered to vote?" I was like, "I should probably check with you guys," because I registered when I was like 16 when I got my driving permit. So it's exciting, like that we're all.
This is my
witnessing
first
history.
presidential election.
Yeah, this is my first
Yeah.
presidential election as well.
Wow,
think
we're all
most of
such
ours.
babies.
We grew up. We're big kids now,
Guys, we
guys.
are. This is
Long way to go.
huge. Well, I voted in last year's 2023 elections, but largely they were, state legislatures, which,
Yeah, yeah.
like I
Yeah,
said in the
very
last
local.
hour,
Very important. Don't
but-
discount it, yeah.
Exactly. Not presidential, not senators and stuff.
Yeah, but still local and national. you know what, we'll leave some of those politics for later. Right now, we have to send our very own resident weather reporter up to the roof to check on the weather. So Brenda,
Get up
coming in
there.
live for us. How are we doing on weather today?
So for today's weather forecast, it's currently 66 degrees outside of the WRHU studios here at Hofstra, and up in the sky, it is cloudy. The rest of the day should be cloudy and humid with an expected high of 74 degrees during the day and a low of 66 in the evening.
I'm interested to see if Hurricane Helene's going to impact us at all. With her being so big.
Yeah, we were chatting about it, you know, in hour one about like the effects on the states that it's like actually scheduled to
But I mean, it's supposed to be like a crappy weekend, kind of, just with like clouds. But
it always tends to have lasting, like other effects on other states that it's not.
We can never get a nice weathered fall fest. We truly cannot.
It's Fall Fest.
We have bad luck.
And I'm going to a music festival this weekend, so the rain better hold out for me.
You're very
open.
Yours
poured
truly
yet.
is covering Fall Fest for WRHU, so yeah, I'm gonna be out in the rain.
We'll be giving you
But
some.
I actually don't know if it's supposed to rain. I think it might just be cloudy.
Maybe we'll just get like fog and humidity, and we'll be okay.
You know what? I'll ask
I would
Shaggy
be fine with
about
that.
it.
I would be fine with. You're gonna ask Shaggy. Yeah, Shaggy might
I'll
help
ask
you
Shaggy
out.
what he thinks of the weather.
We'll investigate some of,
So
whether we get rain or not.
Yeah, so in terms of the next 48 hours with weather, I'm actually worried now because I'm going to a concert, so I don't want to, it looks like about a 30% chance of rain consistently, a high percent chance with 46.
Get that poncho, Cameron. Get that poncho. Get your rain boots.
boots
Get that poncho. Throw it over my nice, cute outfit. It's fine.
I feel like you could work the rain boots with like an outfit. That's like campy.
That is campy. That could be campy.
Can vibe with that.
It is.
Yeah. But you know what? Speaking of rain and water, we're going to move on to some of our local headlines where we have some firefighter news. You know what? So Ashley, let's take it away with our two local headlines.
Yeah, so for your local headlines, firefighters from 15 different departments are currently battling an early morning fire at a company called Four-Way Pallet in Huntington Station. According to officials, the call for the fire came in at roughly 1:10 a.m., and things are still ongoing at the scene. No injuries have been reported at this time, but the fire is yet to be contained.
A man named Stephen Brown has pled guilty regarding the Babylon body parts case, where victims' body parts were found scattered across Long Island in March. He admitted to 6 felony charges yesterday, including concealment of a corpse in connection to the death of his cousin, Malcolm Brown, and Donna Connolly. Brown did not say who committed the murders, but admitted to participating in a plot to kill the victims and conceal their deaths. His housemates, Amanda Wallace, pleaded guilty to similar charges related to the case earlier this week.
The Diocese of Rockville Center reached a $320 million settlement yesterday with roughly 600 alleged sex abuse survivors. Adam Slater, the attorney that represents roughly 100 of the victims, stated that this is the largest diocese settlement in the history of New York State. $234.8 million will come from the diocese parishes and other related entities. Insurance companies will contribute a total of just over $85 million, and the Council for the Creditors Committee will contribute $3 million. For many of these cases, the settlement comes decades after they were allegedly abused by figures in the diocese.
63-year-old Willem Specht was sentenced to 7 to 15 years in prison this week in the case of a drunk driving crash that killed 61-year-old Joseph DeVito outside a Nassau County diner in 2023. Specht's blood alcohol level was more than twice the legal limit, and after hitting DeVito, Specht continued to drive over multiple sidewalks and struck into a metal fence, where he put the car in reverse and struck the wheel of the diner. Specht pleaded guilty to second-degree aggravated vehicular homicide, assault, and aggravated DWI.
18 who was on life support after a car crash that took place over the weekend sadly passed away yesterday. 17-year-old Bella Traza was picking up her younger brother and his friends from a party as their car was struck by a 33-year-old driver who ran a red light. Bella suffered severe brain injury and trauma, significant blood loss, and multiple bone fractures. Ultimately, Bella, one of her brother's friends, and the driver in the other vehicle had all passed away. Funeral services are being held in the coming days.
I want to speak on that last story. Obviously, all very important. But that last headline there hits close to home because this young lady, very sadly, was actually from the high school that I attended, St. John the Baptist Diocesan High School. So she was a senior. So she would have been a freshman there when I was a senior, and I didn't know her. But I just wanted to mention it because the way that I've seen the community come together. For the loss of her, one of the friends, and also the driver in the other vehicle.
I can't believe that all
been,
3 of them passed away. That's so horrible.
And I think it just
more,
goes to
right,
show you.
in critical care, if I'm not mistaken. I believe there were 4 injured in that case.
Yeah,
correct?
3 passed
Or...
away
Wow.
at this time. Yeah, so it's crazy that it hits so close to home. I've seen, I follow the community there. Obviously, that's where I went to school, and it's been heartbreaking to see that, and someone so young. Like, obviously, every death is heartbreaking and is grieved, but someone who's 17, and who was just trying to do a good thing by being responsible and picking up her brother and his friends from a party.
Yeah.
And it ended up that way. Just really, it hurts my heart.
One thing that I noticed in the headline was that that Rockville Diocese settlement.
Yes.
We were talking about that, I think, a couple weeks ago, where there was like one more step in the way. There was like an insurance firm that didn't want to pay out or something, and that was the last hurdle to overcome for these survivors. And they finally got that, which is, I think, a really good thing. Finally holding people accountable for histories of, again, alleged sex abuse, but given the magnitude of the settlement, it's very good to see that the survivors are receiving that.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
And, as sad and as heartbreaking as some of these stories are, we have some more news about a separate issue of abuse where Pope Francis had to take a few rare steps. So bringing us a bit more context and a bit more updates on those is our very own Brenda Fernandez.
Yep, so Pope Francis took the rare step of expelling 10 people, including a bishop, priest, and lay people from a Catholic group in Peru after a Vatican investigation revealed abusive practices. This followed the earlier expulsion of the group's founder, Luis Vigari, who was found guilty of sexual abusing members. The Solitarian Christian Vadi group, founded in 1971, was found to have committed physical, spiritual, and financial abuses. The investigation, led by top Vatican officials, found that the group engaged in violence, exploitation, and even hacking communications to cover up their actions. Among those expelled was Archbishop Jose Antonio Eugen, who was facing allegations of evicting peasants and suing journalists who exposed the group's misdeeds. Victims and advocates welcomed the decision, noting that the group wielded significant influence in Peru. The Vatican expressed solidarity with the victims and urged the group to begin a process of justice and reparation.
Yeah, this comes back down to kind of separating church and state again, where journalists and media have the right to cover stories, and we want to expose the truth, and then people know that they've done wrong, come back in and try and cover it up in other illegal ways, and then still ultimately, the stories usually end up breaking in headlines, and we end up finding out more about the situations that happen. So it's just confusing as to why to me at least, as to why they went through all of these efforts to cover up their actions and now have made the situation so much worse for themselves and so much worse
What I will say, I'm a proud Catholic, and stories like this always throw me for a loop, and I really have to take a step back when I read these things and follow these things and hear about this, because religion as a whole, but I'll talk about the Catholic religion because that's what relates to this story. A large part of it is promoting peace and not violence in any way, any type of violence, and life and growth and prosperity, and the church and these dioceses being sanctuaries for people. That's a big part of it, is sanctuary. And that headline, the Rockville Center Diocese, as well as this larger story, really is hard for me to hear about, because the fact that this is happening in a religious organization is scary to me.
as another Catholic in the room, it's honestly kind of like crazy how widespread this is, because it doesn't just like it happens here in Long Island. It's happening in Peru.
Yeah.
There were I remember a couple years ago there were German maybe bishops and archbishops who were fired because of alleged sex abuse within their clergy. Back in my hometown in Downingtown, PA, we had a very popular Monsignor who was found guilty of like taking money from the church so that he could go to Atlantic City and gamble it, which is like it also paid for other illicit things.
You get to the Tropicana Casino, there's no going back.
I mean, it's just like it's really a shame how easy it is to take advantage of those within the church. You know what I mean? Because people come to the church for a place of sanctity and family, like like Ashley was saying, but then it's like so easy for those that are in the higher up positions to use that and manipulate it in order to go their own way.
You know, there are many people who are very devoted to religion regardless of what's going on in their life, which is what I've always tried to live by. But a lot of people come to religion in their hardest moments in their lives, and rightfully so, because it's something people choose to believe in and they choose to look to, and it provides hope and, again, like safety and sanctuary and protection in a way. And so people go to you as a religious figure, someone a part of the Catholic faith. They go to you, they look to you for help, they donate to the church, whatever it might be, and then to be taking advantage of that, and especially like figures in the church go through a lot of, I'll say, training and a lot of learning. It takes time. Like, for example, to become a priest, it takes a lot of time. You don't just walk into church one day and become a priest. You pledge your life to God. And to become a religious sister, all these things, like you put so much into that and pray and make so many promises that you will never do. That's like the main thing, is that you will never do any of these things, the 10 Commandments.
But it's so rife and it's so rampant.
And then it happens more often than you think. And it's not like when you think of church, it's not what you think about, but it's important to bring awareness to these stories because it does happen.
Yeah.
It does happen.
And it happens a lot, and it happens everywhere, because it's not just here. I mean, there's been stories across the country of dioceses losing, pastors and priests and bishops and stuff for allowing. And this is the interesting thing about this story, is that it wasn't what you most commonly hear is about sex abuse within the Catholic Church.
Yeah, but there's other
types of abuse going on. There's financial fraud. There's physical and spiritual abuse, which is really
emotional as well. Like, religion is a very strong, as I keep going back to, people believe in it very strongly, and you can use that to really affect a person.
Yeah. 100%.
Like I strongly base my life on my religion, and so it's very easy to impact somebody using that as an outlet.
And like, I feel like I'm also Catholic too, but one of the things I started noticing is that the Catholic Church sometimes has a bad rep because of these bad things that happen. Like, I'm looking here, and it says that the first documented case of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church was in 1629.
Wow.
This has happened for extremely long times. And I'm also Peruvian. I've heard so many cases of that happening in Peru. So many people have done that. And at this point, I feel like sometimes the security and police in Peru, they don't really do much as the United States. So it's just more susceptible to happening. So I feel like we have to have some form of regulations, because if this is continuing to happen in every single state and just in general,
well, yeah, like a better like process of identifying who could be potential, causes of this, and not allowing them within, because there are a lot of priests that do a lot of good and that are very good people.
It's just hard, because then it comes down to, like, at least with the Catholic religion, everybody is welcome, and everybody's allowed to repent their sins. So then it becomes an issue of like, can you like deny people from becoming a part of the church because of the background check? Yeah. So it's hard. Like, I do agree that there has to be a way, but it goes against the actual religion, as does the actions that these people are doing. So it's a really, really hard thing to kind of determine. You know?
Yeah.
Gauge, but yeah. So, thank you, Brenda, for those updates. I think it's something important that needs to be talked about. It needs to have more light shed on it so that kind of leadership can maybe hopefully be re-examined later down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
But speaking of leadership and re-examining, we have some updates on the Nassau mask ban that was put into effect a little bit ago. And Cameron, you have some more context and story on that.
I do, yes. A federal judge, has thrown out the lawsuit that was targeting Nassau County's mask ban that was passed back in August. The judge says that the plaintiffs in the case, who are 2 disabled people within Long Island, did not address why the law was unconstitutional or dangerous, given it has medical and health exemptions. Judge Joan Azraq writes, plaintiffs wear masks to protect themselves from illness that is expressly excluded from the Mass Transparency Act's reach by its health and safety exception. Azraq found that the plaintiffs' claim did not successfully argue that police could misapply the law or that those who wear masks would be discriminated against or denied access to public life. This law results in a $1,000 fine and or up to a year in prison for the express purpose of hiding one's identity with a mask. So this law was passed.
I didn't even know about this.
This was passed in August, and it was widely, it wasn't widely discussed. The main people who I remember seeing posting about it were those who were protesting within Long Island, because typically masks are worn at protests to conceal one's identities, from the police identifying
So explain to me this health exemption. So it was passed with the exemption of...
You can still wear your mask,
like a mask
if you're protecting yourself.
Like COVID, because I was like, when I think of a mask ban, when I heard this, I was like... I just think of people wearing, and a lot of people still do wear masks, when they're sick, even if it's not COVID, even if they're just trying to they have a cold and they don't want to, or the flu and they don't want to get others sick. So I think it might be hard to sort of
regulate
enforce
that
and regulate.
You can't, because unless you ask every single person what the reason is that they're wearing a mask, how can you know? I do want to mention, with the health exemptions thing, obviously masks became streamlined in 2020 when COVID hit. But I want to point out that, people have been using obviously medical professionals. That's a given. But also think of other things that maybe aren't communicable diseases, but more so chronic. What about a cancer diagnosis? Someone who's going through chemotherapy, your immune system is completely or mostly compromised in many treatment cases. In which case, people who are undergoing cancer treatment have been wearing masks since well before COVID. So it's something to think about too. But as far as making the distinction, I think it's really hard to do that. It's almost impossible to do that unless you're stopping people, questioning them, in which case they can lie.
So the lawsuit, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say too, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier in hour 1 with social psychology. Who is to say, who's determining why you're wearing these masks? People can say one thing, people can interpret another. So if it's left up to law enforcement, and they might have internal biases already against certain groups of people, so it might just be I see XYZ about you on a surface level and you're wearing a mask, you must be up to no good, when it could be for a legitimate
health reason.
In general, the largest places that we've seen this mask ban come into effect has been at protests. Has been protesters wearing it at protests. And largely I don't think you're going to get stopped in public. And maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe you will be stopped in public if you're wearing a mask just out on the streets of, I don't know, Hempstead or Mineola or whatever. But I think largely when protesters are, protesting at wherever it might be and they're wearing masks, that's where police will pull them over and will take them and will arrest them.
Because in a case of that, some people not wanting to be identified. But again, you can make an argument that protesting, you're outside all day, you're in large crowds of people you don't know, barely know.
Sicknesses could run rampant.
So
and you could
there's
still,
a valid argument. But I'm sure
100%.
people do wear it for the reason of concealment versus
I think that's probably the primary reason why people
wear it.
That's
the biggest reason is to conceal your identity, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have extra effects of protecting from illness.
It's just it's become normalized. If you had a protest before COVID and you saw somebody wearing a mask, you would absolutely go up to them and be like, hey, what's going on? Because not many people wore those. But nowadays it's this uncertain thing. COVID really did change the way that we look at it, because now it's always going to be a valid excuse. Although I do want to point out that, millions of, numbers and research have proven that, for the most part, COVID is like a severe cold now. And thank God it is not as severe as it was when it first came. Although for
Unless
certain
you're
populations,
immunocompromised.
that's what I was going to say. For certain populations, it certainly can be. So it's not a 100% thing. Obviously, it's better to have it now than it was back then, but it's still a health concern.
Do you guys think that this will be passed, like knocked down, the lawsuit?
I don't think it'll go to any higher court, if I can go on a limb. Maybe it will, and if it does, I think that an appeals court could find reason. But, I mean, there is health exemptions in it, so it's like it does kind of cover its bases. Which,
right, I agree.
Again, how do you regulate health exemptions? Like, there's no way to do that. It's like people can get stopped for any reason because they're wearing that mask, and then can get arrested for any reason despite maybe literally just walking past a protest and, you know, trying to protect themselves from illness, you know? Like, it can be a really... It's a really slippery slope, a really dangerous slope to fall down of, you know, what are our rights to stop people, you know what I mean, whenever we feel it necessary.
I agree.
Now, I wonder if they're going to do this for little kids, too, because there's little kids that get sick easily. Would they be forced to take out their mask off just because they're wearing it?
I doubt it. I think it's, again, more to target protesters, and it's more to criminalize protests within Long Island, which is, again, an infringement of the First Amendment right to assemble. You know what I mean? You should be allowed to protest within Long Island, but especially since the reignition of conflict between Israel and Hamas, it's been a lot of protests have emerged across Long Island at universities across Long Island, including here at Hofstra, and I think it's more so that they're just trying to cover their bases and being able to stop protesters from protesting. I
don't think that they're... I think, in some cases, yes, but I think it's also like they're not necessarily stopping people from protesting. They just want to be able to identify people, which again brings up a whole other thing because, like, regardless of what your identity is, you have a right to protest. You know, so it's like it's a little slippery.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, but you know, with that mask ban, obviously there are some, you know, gray areas that we have yet to explore, that we have yet to see be put into effect. But shifting a little bit away from, you know, legislation and law with health and safety, we're going to go back and touch a little bit on one of the stories that we mentioned earlier in our headlines where we had our drunk driving incident. And Brenda, I believe you can bring us some more context on that.
Yep. So a man from Wonton, New York, was sentenced to 7 to 15 years in prison for a drunk driving accident to kill Joseph DeVito outside of a diner in Nassau County. The accident occurred on January 18, 2023, when DeVito, 61, had just left on Parade Diner on Jericho Turnpike and was saying goodbye to a friend. The driver, 63 years old, Willem Shept, was found to be intoxicated with a blood alcohol level more than twice of the legal limit at the time of the crash, which happened around 2:30 p.m. After hitting DeVito, Spelch continued driving in reverse, crashing into a ramp, a fence, and the diner's wall before eventually stopping. He then attempted to leave, but was detained by a witness until the police arrived. DeVito was rushed to the hospital where he later died from his injuries. Spelch pleaded guilty to charges including second-degree vehicular homicide and aggravated DWI. At his sentencing, DeVito's family shared their grief, describing him as a loving husband, father, and grandfather. His widow, Rosemary DeVito, expressed sorrow over the loss and called Spelch a sad person who had struggled with alcoholism. Spelch apologized to the family during the hearing, and his attorney stated that he accepted responsibility for his actions.
I don't understand how this is so rampant. I don't understand how people can go behind the wheel knowing that they're intoxicated. It really confuses me.
This is a topic that we see far too often about stories about drunk driving where these people that decided to get behind the wheel while intoxicated end up killing people and harming families forever. Like, there's nothing you can do to bring back a life. Too often we see people deciding that they're going to get intoxicated and still decide to go driving, and that only heightens your emotions. Like we've seen, he pled guilty to second-degree vehicular manslaughter and aggravated driving while intoxicated.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the fact that he apologized to the family during the hearing and then, like, accepted responsibility, I thought was, like, really not interesting, but it's, like, it just shows that, like, when you are under the influence of alcohol, when you are an alcoholic, when you have this disease, is what it is. Alcoholism is a disease. Like, it really does change. It really does change, you know, your belief system, your judgment, and it impacts how you're able to make decisions, obviously. And then once you are sober, you suddenly feel remorse. Like, yeah, I don't know.
It's just so evil. It's just like there's so many solutions nowadays. We have Uber, you have Lyft. Like, if you drive to a bar and you come out twice the legal limit, like,
what makes you think to get in the car?
What makes you think to get behind the wheel? Also, and why aren't there people regulating that? Why aren't the people being like, yeah, you are visibly intoxicated. I cannot.
I'm really
allow you
curious
to."
because it was at like a diner. I don't know. Oh no,
And
he
half
was
it
leaving
outside
a
of
diner.
He was
half it outside a
driving,
diner.
It was
yeah.
outside. And
Yeah,
that's
I don't know
nice.
what bar he came from, but
Yeah,
or
that's
maybe
what I
he
was
was
gonna
just
bring up too. Like Cameron, you said it's an epidemic, and we've seen this happen for years and years and years.
I feel like
now.
every couple
How have
weeks
we
do a story
exactly.
on it.
Every week or every other week, there's a new
There's
story
someone
about
on
a
it.
drunk driving
Exactly.
incident. So how have we not had, as like local or state or even federal governments, not put regulations or restrictions? Like, yes, it's illegal, but like obviously that's not stopping people from doing it. So there are so many different ways. Like there are some cars that come with ignitions where you have to do a breathalyzer test.
Well, that's
to
for
even,
people who are found guilty.
I was thinking of that. I feel like we should
But
all
there's
have
still-
that. I
there
really
should be
do.
a way to implement something similar to that to people who might not be found guilty, or like they might not have hard evidence, but they have enough suspicion to where people can be like,
But the thing is, alcoholism is so like nuanced, and like how can you have a suspicion about it other than your family who is witnessing it to be like turning?
I mean,
you
it
in?
either needs to be something that's like standardized for everybody, or you really can't.
You can't regulate
implement it. And like Cameron, to your point, you were saying like we have Ubers, we have public transportation, go with the designated driver, things like that. Like I personally think that if you're gonna go out and you know that you're going to engage in activities that involve alcohol, take an Uber on your way there.
Yep.
So that when you get out, you have no choice but
Don't
to take another one.
drive.
Don't even
Don't
take your
drive
car with you.
there.
Now,
Don't
I'm not
let the
sure.
temptation of
I'm not
driving,
sure the context of this particular man and if he was at a bar or if this is something that he was like partaking in often and he did have like those alcoholism like tendencies. But what I do know is regardless of how the alcohol got in your system, it inhibits your prefrontal cortex, which is your decision maker. And it activates something in your brain called the limbic system, which is your emotional part of your brain. So it completely disregards any kind of logic because your brain is releasing so much dopamine, which is our happy hormone that gives us pleasure. So unless you really don't have an option and you have to take an Uber, you shouldn't, I guess I should say it this way, you shouldn't have to make a choice when you're under that influence because your logic is completely down.
Yeah.
So making sure that you really don't have that choice, because you could be the most logical person in the world and you're like, I would never drive behind the wheel when I'm intoxicated. But when you are intoxicated, that part of you that said that is literally asleep. And it's not
the
working.
other thing is that it's not just alcohol that plays a role. It's also illicit substances and marijuana. Like these are all things that you shouldn't be behind the wheel if you are under the influence of them. Like it's not just, and that's the thing. It's so rampant. Like there's so many people who just get behind the wheel and they're like, yeah, no, I might be, a little bit high, but I'm just it'll be fine. I'll be chill. I'll be able to do it. Like, no.
That's
in
not
that
how
case,
that works.
Yeah.
In that case, no. You should never do
Yeah,
that.
people think that it's just a little bit. I just had one drink. You would be surprised how much that can affect you. You would be surprised. Yeah. Now, some people have more of a tolerance to these kinds of substances than others, depending on it's actually genetic. There's so many factors. But regardless of what your tolerance is, even if you don't think you feel anything, it's like, why risk it?
Yeah.
Why risk
Yeah.
it? You don't
You
know
never
what you're
wanna
feeling till you're
ever.
behind the wheel and things look a little bit off, or you're feeling a little bit off, or things kick in later. You have no idea, so just don't take the risk.
Yeah, and something that this reminded me too of Welcome Week, my first year coming into Hofstra. Something that really stuck out to me was one of these events about how to drink responsibly, basically. Where if you're under 21, obviously it's illegal. Don't do it. But people make decisions, and so one of the really home run points that they made was always go out with a buddy who knows your designated person, even if they're not a driver, even if you're just walking somewhere, a designated person
Be with
that won't be
someone.
drinking, and to be with someone so that someone who is cognitive of what's happening around you and someone who can focus on different things and be aware and like be prepared for different things that may arise. Bring someone with you so that you at least have a buddy watching out for you too.
Right.
Which is something I think can be applied in a bunch of different scenarios.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to driving. That's my piece on it. But we're going to move on to a little bit more upbeat news, a bit more lighthearted. Climate Week 2024 is coming up. Long Island has a climate change resilience plan. We are ready to face the world and hopefully help to start making it better. And Ashley, you have some more context for us on that.
Yeah, I'm very excited that we're covering a lot of local news. I always enjoy covering local news, and this is nice because this is a very exciting thing that happens across New York State and Long Island. Climate Week is a designated week where politicians, activists, and citizens alike in New York State all come together to essentially discuss the consequences and effects of climate change on the state and also the country and globally, and what changes and improvements can be made to help limit its progression. So this statewide event for 2024 began this past Sunday, and it's going to end in a few days this upcoming Sunday. It goes for 7 days. But the festivities are still in full swing today. In its 15th year, the event consists of roughly 600 events, seminars, workshops, talks, and protests as well. This week-long event is attended by everyone from politicians to scientists, business owners, and celebrities alike, including Norway's foreign minister, Google's chief sustainability officer, and even Prince Harry. In the spirit of Climate Week 2024, PSE&G Long Island and the Long Island Power Authority, the LIPA, have joined forces to publish a proactive climate change resilience plan, known as the CCRP, to address predictions of new weather patterns that are coming up for the next few decades. The plan includes solutions from PSE&G to reduce the amount and duration of outages across the island during adverse weather events, and promises to adapt physical assets like electrical poles, power lines, transformers, and switches in accordance with a climate change vulnerability study known as the CCV. The plan also highlights the future implementation of new technology, including new monitoring systems and plans for how to handle low voltage levels on big power days where they have a large load. So I think that this is really, really great that there are new plans being announced. Essentially, PSE&G's approach is that it's not so much about their approach isn't about stopping climate change.
It's about energy conservation.
It's about energy conservation and a better response plan for when inevitably we have some more adverse weather effects.
One of the things that during this presidential symposium, keep pulling back to that, that I attended was on Tuesday, 9:40 to 11:05. There was a panel on the environment, and the biggest thing that was talked about was like the necessity of wind power here on Long Island. We have a lot of wind that happens that
near the beach.
Oh yeah,
it would be very, very productive to have offshore wind programs, but because of lobbying from anti-wind people, it's resulted.
See, I don't understand
the anti.
How can you be anti-wind?
So I'll give you guys a rundown. Basically, the biggest things is the fact that number one, wind has an aesthetic effect. The turbines can be seen, but now that it's like. Now that we've gotten further on it,
maybe it's just me. I kind of like the way turbines look. Like
I kind of vibe with it.
Watching them spin around.
I mean, I don't mind one way or another.
So see, that's the interesting thing though, is that when the first wind power plants offshore were starting in like the early 2000s, they were only 3 miles off the coast, so you could definitely see them. Now they're up to 18 miles off the coast, so they're far enough away that people can't see them. But that opens up a new thing. So. This is a big thing that was talked about, was the necessity or the role of local media in publishing and exacerbating voices that are small but vocal, right? And one of the biggest things that these small but vocal voices were advocating against wind power for was that these huge cables were essentially connected to these wind turbines going under the sea and then into concrete,
Yeah,
like 3 foot
I was
underground
thinking
into
about
its beach.
that.
And the reason that they were saying that we shouldn't, have wind power is because these big cables are going to create electromagnetic fields that are going to give people cancer, cause fertility issues, and prevent Long Islanders from living happy lives, which is not accurate because do you see how many cables are in this room right now? I mean, I can see. I can't even count, like 50,
There are
more
too
than 50.
many to count.
Yeah, there's a lot of cables everywhere. And, I mean, I haven't developed cancer yet.
Let's all knock on wood and pray.
We all don't.
Well,
it's just, I think it's crazy because there's cables everywhere constantly. You know what I mean?
Well, we're all always living around power. I mean, how many of you put your phone charger next to your bed?
If you want to avoid electromagnetic fields, get off your phones and never ever touch it again. Yeah. Because you know how much electromagnetic
No, you're
power
totally
is generated
right. Or
from
like
here?
even when they say like to using your cell phone up to your ear, how they've said like that could even have like effects. But I
don't
think
get X-rays.
Yep,
Like that's
exactly.
radiation
Don't do anything
too.
ever. Don't do anything ever. Like sit in complete darkness.
It's a part
and
of
silence in your
physics.
house.
It's a part of our world.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up another point of this because I think it's interesting that these are all the things that are being discussed
Yeah.
at this climate conference, and it just goes to show that this issue is beyond just like big oil companies and them expelling energy and like usually when I feel like you learn about your basic like climate change issues, it's greenhouse gases and things like that, but this is just so much more nuanced. There's so many more details that are going into what impacts climate change, how we're going to prevent it, besides just trying to like I don't know, I go back to thinking about like paper straws and like plastic straws, you know what I mean? Like that was, I feel like when they were trying to do that was like, oh, this is for the earth. Like I know it helps like the turtles and things like that, like keeping plastic out of the oceans, but it also had to do with like overproduction. But
putting the blame on the individual as opposed to the conglomerate is demonstrably not the way to go about this. You know what I mean? Like the only reason that the existence of like a carbon footprint, for example, is the thing that exists now is because like oil and big energy activists and lobbyists wanted people to feel more responsible for their actions so that they could take a lot of the blame off of themselves. And that's been highly proven over time. And did you know that some estimations find that in a little bit more than 50 years, we could not have Jones Beach anymore. Like there could be like beaches on Long Island that just erode and disappear into the ocean because of how quickly the icebergs
Long
are
Island
melting
is also very slowly sinking.
It is. It is.
So
much like and Florida is as well. There's estimations that by like 2100 something along those lines, that the like entire like Florida could shrink by like 25% because of the ocean basically swallowing up its coasts.
Yeah, like
And people just say like, "Oh, more beachfront property." No, that's not how that works. You're losing property and have to push things in.
You're losing the environment.
Properties are gonna go into the ocean.
Yeah,
Alex,
my house is a block from the water.
I have had so many videos pop up
God.
on social media pages, and obviously they're not credible because people are just absolutely crazy on social media. But so many people are making fun of climate change and just
not
saying,
something
like,
to make fun of. Yeah,
exactly. That just because the ocean levels are rising, more beaches are being created. No, that's not how that works.
The Department of Environmental Conservation here in New York says that over the next 25 years, sea levels in Long Island are going to rise 13 to 25 inches. That's more than 2 feet, and as much as 69 inches by the end of this century. So by 2100, Long Island could be how much is 69 divided by 12? Can someone do that math real quick? 4 feet? 4 feet? Is that not mistaken? 4 feet? Because it's
a little bit. It's going to be more. It's going to be like 5.
Oh, yeah, no,
5.75.
Yeah, 5 3/4 feet underwater.
So my height underwater, pretty much is what we're at.
Exactly. Go to the beach and stand, and that's how far. Ashley,
by the time I'm 96,
go to Jones Beach. Ashley's gonna stand there, and you'll see how far. The ocean can take the beach.
I think like we've heard about this as global warming for a long time, but the reality is that this has opened up, a lot more discussion, like by opening this up to the concept of like saving the environment, energy conservation, just noticing what's going on in the natural world around us, and opening up to climate change, because it's not just global warming. Like the weather patterns, temperatures are shifting all across the world. It's not just, our world's getting hotter, like the temperature. It's not. There's a big misconception about really what climate change refers to, and I think that it's great that there's more conversations being opened up about it. But I will say that the amount of industrialization that has taken place in our world is reversible. Not reversible. It's more so a fact of like can we like preserve
Mitigate it.
what's left? Because you can't reverse the damage that's been done to the earth, to the atmosphere. Like it's not
there.
It's not like a tiny issue that like happened in one state and you can kind of like fix it and play damage control. Like it's the entire world. So it's more of like trying to find ways to, as Cameron said, to mitigate it and make sure that it doesn't progress. Because if it continues to progress at the rate that it's going, there's going to be a lot of major changes impacting everybody in regards to how our world is shifting.
I should say, don't go to Jones Beach. Ashley's not actually going to be there. I was a joke.
Unfortunately, I wish I could go there and get a
just
tan.
an explanation of how quickly the beaches can be taken over.
But no, you're so right. We have to start looking towards the future. But you know what? For today, we'll focus on a future that's more positive and lighthearted and fun. And so we turn to an interview done by our very own Gabby Yanovitz. So Gabby, let's take it away.
Correct. Senior year of high school can bring a lot of fear and uncertainty for students. I know it certainly did for me, whether I was stressing about, college applications or simply pondering the future. Leaving your childhood years behind certainly was not an easy pill to swallow for me, and I'm sure most high school seniors. But I sat down with Cold Spring Harbor High School senior Zoe Abelson, and the future is looking certainly bright for her and can't seem to come sooner. Zoe has been dazzling the stages of Long Island's top theaters for the last decade, performing in musicals, plays, and even competing in New York State School Music Association competitions. Her rendition of Après un rêve even received a perfect score at the NISMA All-State competition. While working tirelessly through applications to some of the best theater programs across the country, Zoe's passion for performing is always at the heart of everything she sets her mind to. I had the pleasure of hearing from Zoe about her journey thus far and what the future holds. Let's take a listen.
You were sent our way because you are, a star on the rise in some ways. So tell me about your performance background, all the things you've been doing. Tell me where you sort of got your start as a performer. Where did this passion come from?
When I was young, I used to write stories and act them out for my family at a very young age. I'd say around 4 years old. I just loved putting myself out there from very early on, I'd say. I always was talking to random people, just trying to get more insight on people because I don't know, I had such a fascination to people and what makes them them. And that's kind of what got me into acting. Yeah, on a deeper level, I guess, acting, it started with my curiosity about people. So to get to kind of the core of a human being and understand why they are who they are. And that kind of got into acting. When I got roles, I studied, okay, why do they have this action? Why do they do this? Why do they do that?
So you're just the understanding of people and who they are and all the character study and stuff like that. What keeps you pushing through? I know the rehearsal days are probably long and you've been in so many shows. Through all that stress, what do you feel keeps you going?
So this might sound kind of crazy, but some people operate this way. I actually thrive in a busy schedule. I'm the type of person where if I have no structure, it makes me stressed out not having a specific schedule. So being busy from right away 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. That's what I do. That's where I thrive. I enjoy rehearsals always, no matter what, even if I don't have a good part or even if I do, I love being around people. I love being around my castmates. I mean, my school, it's a very tight-knit group. We have very few people. We're not a huge theater school, but we're very close. We've been together for so many years.
Tell me about how you got into the theater program at your high school, and you also do theater outside of school. So tell me what sort of things you've done.
In school, I started right when I came in 7th grade. I was new at Cold Spring Harbor High School, so I didn't really know anyone, but obviously I knew I was going into theater because my passion was from way early on, 4, so it's been there for a while. I started in The Sound of Music as Gretel, a little 6-year-old. It was really cute. And then about a little over 20, so to keep count, but I love it. I was in Evita in Smithtown. I was an Annie in Farmingdale or something, like somewhere around there. I've been to many.
Do you like doing the outside of school productions more? Because you also, I feel like there's a balance. You have like your close knit people at your school.
Right.
What is the difference?
I think in school, well, there were a lot of people that I was really close with that graduated last year. But other than that, I really like participating in community theaters, like all across Long Island. You name somewhere, I've probably been there. But I really like doing shows outside because it's a lot of different people. There's more people. And I love doing bigger shows. Like my school can't do certain shows because we are so small. So it's very hard to do certain things. So like we couldn't do Mean Girls. And then I saw a theater that I've been to did Mean Girls. So I was like, okay, I'll audition. And I was Gretchen. I loved it so much.
We can talk about your future plans a little bit. You're a senior, last year of high school. I remember it being very daunting and scary, but what do you think about in the future? Do you want to pursue acting? What do you think you want to do?
Well, okay, as far as college, 100% I'm going into a BFA or BA program, definitely majoring in theater, acting. Unclear where I'm going yet, of course. It's still very early on. I do want to get out of New York, but at the same time, my love is like my passion is theater. That's all I'm going for. So it's
New York City.
New York City. That's central of like theater. Like that's like the heart of everything. So I do have a bunch of New York schools, a bunch of hard schools, because I mean, when you're a theater kid, you kind of just push your limits. I'm big on challenging myself. I like to kind of see what I can do and what people would think about me.
Yeah, because I know about like the BFA audition process.
Oh my!
For the viewers that don't know, give them a little explanation.
I'm not too deep in the process yet, but
it's still early. Yeah.
I'm a quarter of the way, and you have to start picking your monologues and your songs and your dances way in advance. But pre-screens, it's just essentially like a recording of you kind of slating like, hi, I'm Zoe Abelson, and you deliver your monologue in like your 2 monologues or your song or your dance, and you just submit it to the schools early. But first they would just watch your pre-screen and then decide, do I want her, do I not? Okay, you can come in for an in-person audition. And then an in-person audition, they may say, okay, we're going to teach you this dance combo, and then you're going to have to do it for us. We're going to have you sing a song in person, do a monologue. And then sometimes there's wild cards, there's supplement essays, which, I mean, that's for a lot of majors. It's not just, I've tried to do a bunch of interviews, especially for theater, because you really want to be known. You don't want to just walk into the audition room and be a number, as I said, a number of like 100 and like 100.
So many people. It's so competitive.
I'm really, again, challenging myself. It's just see what you can do. And plus, I only get this experience once. I only get to apply once. May as well go big or go home.
What is that pressure? What is the pressure like? Because also when it comes to this career field, there's a lot of pressure that you put on yourself. So speak on like, the struggles of that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to be super honest. I mean, I honestly put the most pressure on myself. It is a lot, and I stress myself out so much that I can't even sleep at night sometimes about this. Like I think about this 24/7. Like this is my life. Like I eat, sleep, breathe my college auditions, theater. The stress, it's a lot. It's draining, and it's hard to kind of balance how stressed I'm getting over these auditions. It's hard to balance that with actually going to school still and like doing work, because my mind is elsewhere. Don't go into this major unless you're really okay with sacrificing a lot, honestly. Like I had other passions. I did fencing, I did rowing, I did cheer, I did a bunch of other things. I enjoyed them. But you have to give all of that up for theater. I can't do anything else. You need to know that is what you want, and then you set your heart and your mind to it, and then you just go full force at it. Whatever happens.
It's a great answer. With all like the stress and things like that, you also seem like you're very set in your mind. This is what you want to do. So how has that been like rewarding? What are some of the things that have made you most proud to go into this field like with full force? What have been some of the biggest rewards?
For one, it's good when the guidance counselors coming into school and going back and forth, like, it's okay to go to school undecided. Do you know, like, does everyone know what they want to do? So it feels like I can breathe for a second. Okay, at least I know what I want to do. And there are people who are still struggling to figure out what they want to do. But that in itself feels good. But aside from school, New York State Thespian.
As this officer position, what have been like some of your top moments?
Our first meeting, it was in a New York City office. It felt very professional. I felt like a businesswoman walking in. Sit down, put your little name tag on, introduce ourselves. It felt very surreal to just be in a circle with everybody who was so interested in doing the same thing. The reason that we are on this board is because we're so passionate. This is our everything. And it felt so nice to mentally connect with every single person in the room. This is what we really want to do. Mm-hmm. And we're really serious about it. It's not just we like to be in plays and shows. That's more of a hobby. This is our life.
I saw that you are working to plan like a festival.
Yes.
Yeah, what's that going to be like?
So far this year, we put on a 2-day festival for everyone in New York State who has a thespian troupe. My goal, fingers crossed, is to bring my school. Mm-hmm. Really hope so. And we just have a bunch of different stations, a lot of different things, but it's all thespian theater related. It's not just a normal festival. It's for all theater lovers. So I'm very excited for that.
That sounds really cool, just to be representing so many people like across the state who are also just as passionate as you. I'm sure it sounds awesome. While balancing, college apps, like what would you say even though you're still going through it as well, what's your advice to other people?
I think that this was the most important thing for me to answer, the advice. I think balance is incredibly important, as we all need that, as you said, to stay sane. Right now, of course, it's the most stressful time for seniors, especially because it's application season, and that causes a lot of anxiety and stress. It's extremely important to take care of yourself, put yourself first over others sometimes. I think that that's really important. That's the most important thing to do. Listen to yourself, especially, and learn to appreciate your limits. But limits are not weaknesses.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wisdom.
Thank you. It's just a matter of knowing how you work best and adjusting your time management to work for you so you can be successful. I think aiming high takes tremendous dedication, and sometimes you will really need to be willing to sacrifice what you want versus what you need to get there.
Wow, lots of amazing things. As we are getting ready to wrap up, I want to, remind the listeners, this has been Zoe Abelson, star-studded, soon to be, maybe we'll see you on Broadway one day. I'm hope so. My fingers are crossed from you. Any last words to wrap up how you feel, about the Long Island theater community?
It's small, it's diverse, it's talented, but specifically when I went to the Paramount for the Hunting Tonys, you saw I got nominated. Very exciting for Best Actress in a Play for the show last year. But when I was there, I saw so many old faces, so many people I hadn't seen since I did like Little Mermaid when I was 8 years old. And I saw this girl. We still recognized each other from across the room. We still knew each other. Old castmates, students I went to UStan with, old friends from acting classes all across Long Island. And even someone I went to Carnegie Mellon with. Theater's a small world, anywhere really, but especially Long Island.
This has been so great. Where can people find you if they want to follow your journey?
I just created an Instagram official. It is lowercase, all lowercase, zoeabelson.official. So I post my articles I've written. I've posted shows I'm in, little clips of everything. You can also follow my school's drama club. I post myself on there a lot along with other people. CSH Drama Club, all lowercase.
I want to thank Zoe again for taking the time to sit down with me. It was such a pleasure meeting her. She has so much to say about, just the process of auditioning for theater programs across the country. And, I'm someone who also had a theater background. So it was really interesting just to relate and hear someone who's, really taking that full approach and just going full force. And you can also read a little bit more about her and her journey in the Long Island Press. There is a feature online. If you look that up, you can read a little bit more about her, see some photos. But yeah, overall, I don't know. I'm sort of a theater kid myself.
I am
too.
Theater Kids Unite. Yeah, I've been doing theater since second grade, and I did kind of have to step back from it during college just because things get so busy, but that's such a beautiful local story, and it was so great to hear more about her journey.
Yeah, definitely a spotlight.
Yeah,
I was a choir kid, so I was never on the musical theater grind.
That's okay. So to end it off, I have a question of the day requested by Cameron Bowden.
Yes,
she wants a question.
What's the question?
So we might make this a thing. I have a question of the day.
Okay.
If you could be a theater kid, or for those of us who are, what's your dream role?
I was hoping you would ask this.
Yeah, because I have a lot of strong opinions on this. So Karen, start.
Oh wait, I actually have to start.
I put you on the spot. Well, if anybody has an answer.
I wanted the question so badly, and now I have to deal with the repercussions of it. I guess I would say Elphaba from Wicked.
Wait, I was thinking.
Oh my God, me and Gabby the same person. For
I was
real.
thinking that. Yeah.
2 different fonts in the room right now. But no, I love Wicked. It was one of my first musicals that I interacted with it. Very, very fun. Much love. Brenda, what about you? Do you do musical at all?
I'm not gonna lie, I've never seen a musical before.
That's okay.
We have to take a field trip. All right. What about a famous role from a movie or something?
Yeah.
I guess I wouldn't mind trying out Lion King.
Okay.
That's fair. That's a musical. We can live with that. That's good.
That was a good musical.
Yeah,
too.
it's a great musical.
I was gonna say Elphaba. I thought of Sophie from Mamma Mia, and who else was I gonna say? Gabriella from High School Musical.
Oh, well, you're Gabby, so it would work out.
Right.
I would say I know it's kind of an intense show, but I like Veronica from Heathers.
Okay.
It's a fun character, and I would also love Lydia from Beetlejuice. That's a really good
yes,
one.
Beetlejuice is so good.
Yeah, because I did Beetlejuice in my theater group, and I was Delia, the fun life coach.
Yeah.
But I'd love to be Lydia. That'd be cool.
And
Alex?
I was gonna say anyone from Newsies, Newsies.
Ooh, yeah.
I love it. But yeah. So that'll do it for today's Friday edition of the Morning Wake Up Call. Thank you all for tuning in, and make sure you stay here for Off the Charts for some great music. Thank you all so much, and have a great Friday.